Hail, hail, fire and snow, call the angel, we will go far away, far to sea, friendly angel, come to me. Hello and welcome to Enchantment of Eternity's Review for And the Children Shall Lead, which is episode 5 of season 3 of Star Trek The Original Series. This video is a part of a series of videos where I review episodes of Star Trek The Original Series, one episode at a time. In this episode I cover the 3rd season episode, And the Children Shall Lead. So, And the Children Shall Lead is the episode where Kirk investigates a planet where all the parents, adults have died, leaving only children. The children seem very nonchalant. They don't seem to care about the tragedy that just taken place. They take them on the Enterprise to find out that they are possessed by this evil alien spirit that was on the planet that killed the parents, and that they give the children magical powers to mind control people, and they're trying to force the Enterprise to go to this colony against their will so that the evil alien can reign supreme and take over there. But Kirk managed to defeat the alien by making the children depressed about the fact that their parents just died. Way to go, Kirk. Way to parent. Hey kids, guess what? You remember your parents when they were so happy? Here's pictures of them. You're so happy. Now they're dead! Ha ha! And that's how Kirk wins. So anyway, this is an infamously bad episode. It is very disliked. And it is, in fact, the lowest rated episode on IMDb. It is lower than The Way to Eden. It is even lower than Spock's Brain. And at least, rightfully, it is lower than The Alternative Factor. But again, don't get me started on that. So, and a lot of people bring this up as being one of the worst episodes. I don't always do this for my reviews of these original series episodes, but I've watched a whole bunch of different reviews from different people on this episode, and almost all of them hated this episode and said it was one of the worst of the entire show. Now, ready for my hot take? Are you ready for my hot take? This episode was awesome. No, I'm kidding. I don't think that. But I do have a hot take. I don't think it's that bad. Honestly, it didn't make my top 10 worst episodes of the original series, and I don't think it would. Still. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think this is a good episode. I don't like this episode. It is definitely a bad episode, but honestly, I don't think it's as bad as people say. I think there's other episodes of the original series that I'd much rather not watch. Like, if you sit me down and okay, you have to watch an episode of the original series, and it has to either be Mud's Women or this episode, I'm going to put this episode on in a heartbeat. It's definitely got to be Assignment Earth or this episode. I'm watching this episode. You definitely have to watch The Paradise Syndrome or this episode. Boom, I go straight to that. I'd much rather watch this episode than any of those. I think those episodes are way worse, and I think there's plenty more that are worse. And it's funny because one of the reviews I watched said, season 3 was so great up into this episode. We had great episodes like Spectre of the Gun, Elan of Troyes, and the Enterprise Incident, and the Paradise Syndrome, and then we get this shit episode. And I was very puzzled by that statement. The Enterprise Incident was the only episode they mentioned in that was actually better than this episode. All the other episodes were either worse or just as bad. Spectre the Gun and Alana Troyes, I would say, were just as bad, maybe marginally. Spectre the Gun might have been marginally better, to be fair. But Paradise Syndrome was worse, and they were saying, "Oh, these are much better episodes." I don't get that. But anyway, and so I just kind of think that the beginning of season 3 was not good. There would be some good episodes in season 3 because I talked about in my season 2 coverage how much I like season 3, and so far I've done nothing but rag on it, except for the Enterprise incident. But even that I didn't like as much as most people do. But just wait till later in the season. I will get to episodes that I like a lot. But at the beginning of the season is actually quite bad. It actually had a really rough start in my humble. So, I mean, this episode, obviously it's dumb. Obviously the ending was really stupid. Obviously the concept of this, demon angel taking over the ship and using children to do it is just a stupid concept, and it's not executed particularly well. But I was marginally entertained. I was entertained enough to not either be bored or to be actively annoyed, like episodes like Mud's Women, which do both, and actively hate it. And I understand that some people do find it actively annoying. I can understand that with the children. Honestly, and this might be a controversial statement, kind of like this episode better than Charlie X. I think Charlie X is worse than this episode. Similar in terms of an annoying kid with magical powers coming on and trying to take over the Enterprise. But to me, that episode is worse and it's more problematic. Because I actually kind of thought the concept of having these children having this, tragic death of all these adults on the scientists on this planet, and the children being very nonchalant, was actually a very interesting mystery, and it's interesting psychologically how, and then McCoy even talks about how some kids can sort of block out trauma and refuse to face it, and it is interesting because every time Kirk brings up their parents, and they're actually running around playing over the parents' dead bodies, and they're oblivious to this. And every time Kirk brings up the parents, they find a way to change the subject to make it about play or something fun. And that's an interesting concept. Now, then you introduce the magical powers aspect, and granted that's when the episode starts sliding downhill. But even then, I'm still okay with it to an extent. I'm still entertained, but I'm engaged with it. I think it's a kind of a suspenseful threat that Sulu and the crew is taken over by these visions, and Kirk and Spock can't break them from it. And it seems like an impossible situation. How are Kirk and Spock going to get out of it? Now, the ending is where I think everything falls apart, because I think they get out of it too easily, and it's not particularly interesting how they get out of it, so they could have done that better. But I was mostly on board with this. I was mostly on board with the setup. Now, several things I gotta mention. As I said, I watched a bunch of reviews, and almost all of them point to William Shatner's overacting, which I feel like at this stage I'm just beating a dead horse, because I talk about that in every episode, and particularly season 3, it seems like it's gotten worse. But you know what? Because the reviews I watched said, oh my god, this is easily the worst performance by Shatner, or this is easily, he was doing good up until this point, and this is a terrible, really stereotypical, all the stereotypes of Shatner's pausing stuff and overacting is exemplified here. I actually disagree. I stand by my earlier statements that God, I can't even remember what episode it was now. There was the Enterprise incident, which was a decent episode, but it had some of the worst hammy Kirk acting and the whole thing. That's what made the episode not as good. That's why I don't think it's as good as everyone, because and the time when he went, "Oh, Goyo! Oh, Goyo!" I think that is worse than here. Now, in this episode, what they're referring to is when the kids trying to make to bring up the beast. They try to make everyone see their demon to make them afraid, like a horror sees this mirror that materialized out of nowhere that wasn't there before. It makes her see herself as an old lady, and she's terrified, old and deformed. And like Sulu seeing like swords out in space, and that the Enterprise veers that it could go to, be struck down by the sword, which is a bit weird, but so everyone's having their different fears, and when Kirk is like, "I'm losing command. I'm losing command." Now, don't get me wrong. That's a terrible performance. It is very hammy, and he is chewing the fuck out of the scenery. But I don't think it's any worse than what we've seen from him so far. His, "Mirmani, I love you." I think, to me, I guess why I don't mind this performance, or I don't think it's worse. I do mind this performance. I do think it's just as bad as Yeller's, but not necessarily worse, is because he doesn't do the pausing thing as much. I mean, he kind of goes like, "Spock, I'm losing command. Spock." But he doesn't do pause for the pausing for a really long time is what really gets me. And I noticed this in other episodes, like Return to Tomorrow is like, "But I'm not going to make this an order because Dr. McCoy is right." And it's not just that he pauses. When he comes back from pausing, he talks very fast. Like, he slows down and then just pauses for several seconds and then lets it trail, and then boom, speeds through his dialogue. Because Dr. McCoy's right. And he doesn't do that as badly here. So a reviewer said that this scene in this episode exemplifies all of the imitations, all of the, mocking and making fun of the comedians like Jim Carrey and Kevin Pollak, and it exemplifies everything they're talking about, but I think they're wrong. I think those other scenes exemplify it more, because the thing that those comedians emphasize is the long pauses followed by quick talking. And he doesn't do it that much in this episode. But, his performance still sucks. But at this stage, I'm just sick of talking about how horrible an actor he is. Kind of over it. But anyway, then speaking of acting, there's the opposite side of the spectrum in this episode with the Gorgon, the demon guy that the children call. And as I alluded to, the children's chant does sound kind of monotone and uninspired, like hail, hail, fire, and so calling, and they repeat it several times, so it's grates on your nerves. It's very tedious. And then the alien himself is very flat. It's like, "Yes, my children, you will come, and we will win, and we will defeat, and Kirk will try to stop us, but we will prevail, and we will take over. So shall it be do. So shall you do. So shall you do. So shall you do." And it is kind of flat and monotone. And so a lot of people pointed out that this is played by not an actor. It's played by a lawyer who's kind of a popular lawyer who's covered a lot of well-known historical figures. And so it was done as kind of a ploy to boost ratings because, hey, we have this popular figure here in our Star Trek episode. What's his face? Walter Koenig, who plays Chekhov, was very upset about this, and he blames the showrunner Fred Freiberger for this because apparently they were good friends, and he was saying that the only reason he got this lawyer with no acting, who's not an actor, to be in this episode because they're friends, and so he was very upset about that the role should have went to an actual actor. And a lot of critics and reviews I've seen like trash his performance. But you know what? I don't think it's that bad. Now, could it have done better? Sure. Maybe I'm just refreshed to see a performance in the original series that's not chewing the scenery, and that's not ever. They probably would have preferred someone to be like, "Oh, and we will take over the planet, and we will conquer the Enterprise, and Kirk will build to us, and we will destroy, and we will conquer the planet. So shall it be. So shall it be." Which I'm glad they didn't do that. I kind of prefer the "and so shall it be." And I think it's not like a terrible performance. I'm again an amateur, but I do know a little bit about acting, and I think his voice has a nice cadence to it. So shall it be, so shall it be. So shall we do, so shall we do. And we will conquer the planet and we will take over. I don't think, it doesn't sound like, I've seen bad acting, trust me. And it doesn't sound like, how someone described it as someone who had with no acting abilities try to remembering their lines, which I don't think it sounds like that. Like, I've seen that, and I've probably seen that in the original series, where someone is actively, you can tell they're like reading from a cue card or just thinking and trying to read their minds, but I never got that impression from this. And mind you, I've seen this episode tons of times, before I had the knowledge that this wasn't a real actor, and I would have never noticed this wasn't a real actor had I not been told that, because this performance never really jumped out at me as particularly terrible. I would actually say the kids' performances, particularly there's this one kid who I think was a relative of someone involved with the show, and never did any acting after this episode. The one who asked for something, the dessert with peach or whatever. I think his performance was noticeably worse. I think the lawyer guy who played Gorgon was fine. And yeah, he was a bit understated. He was a bit undertoned. And he was like, "So shall you do, so shall." But I think he had a nice, as I said, I think he had a nice cadence to his voice. And I feel like when he's reading his lines, like he believes what he's saying, that he's not just reciting words on the page. I do get, and that's what I always felt when I was watching this episode. And I think people just let their outside interference, their knowledge of the fact that this is not an actor and a lawyer interfere, and so they pick up on things that aren't necessarily there because of that outside knowledge. That's my opinion, though. I could be wrong. Now, it's not the best performance in the world, don't get me wrong, but it's not the worst either. So I would take this over Shatner's hammy eating, chewing scenery any day of the week. But again, that's kind of my personal preference and why I kind of harp on Shatner a lot and these other overactings. Like, I think the worst performance in the original series was back, and I mentioned this when I reviewed the episode, Dagger of Mine, where it had that guy who was acting like he was going insane from that mind control device. So, I won't go back! You won't take me back! Like, I think fucking give me this guy going, "So shall it do, so shall we do." Give me that billion times over the week over, "I won't go back! You won't take me back!" I think that's a billion times worse. But again, that's kind of my preference, and I guess the way I was trained as an actor and director. Again, amateur, I'm not a real one. I don't state to be one, but I have had training, and my training emphasized subtlety over scenery chewing, if you know what I'm saying. And so that's always, so I've been trained to appreciate the subtleness over the top. So if I see a bad actor who's over the top and a bad actor who's subtle, the one who's over the top is going to bother me a lot more. And yeah, I mean, I think they could have had an actual actor play this role better, for sure. But if the original series is any indication, they would have gotten an over actor who chewed the fucking scenery. So I actually would prefer this. Or like that fucker from conscience of the king is like, I am tired. I'm like, no. Anyway, anyway. So when the children are mind controlling people, they're doing this. And I wasn't gonna say anything, but I watched this review and I started cracking up laughing. So they use the universal symbol for masturbation to control people's mind. Because when I was like 17, 18, 19, we used to get stoned and hang out with our friends, we'd always do that symbol, and we wouldn't like it was a masturbation symbol, but we wouldn't mean literally like, oh, someone's in the bathroom. No, we'd use it more of like if someone is being annoying, particularly if like someone's droning on about doing a lecture. Like I used to my dad would drone on about lectures and all of that, and behind his back we'd just go, or whatever, if someone's like trying to be condescending or moralizing, you're just like, yeah, sure, whatever. And so, but to be fair, that symbol's a bit faster, or at least that, how me and my friends used to do it. Like, yeah, sure, yeah, whatever. Whereas in this episode, it's more. And also the music. I think the music's in. One of the reviews said they hated the music in this episode. I kind of like the music, actually. Where they go, dun, 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 every time they do it. I think that actually sells. Like, I can buy that they're using the masturbation symbol to control people's minds because the music sells it. When they go, dun, 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 and it's slower and more controlled, but I kind of noticed that too. I'm like, but again, it was probably years later when they, they didn't really use that in that way at the time this episode was produced. But then there's another, talking about filmmaking, there's another moment, and this I did hear someone critique it, and I actually agree this time, that the editing in this episode is bad because there's a scene when they're on the bridge and Sulu is seeing the swords, and they play this, and this is when the music gets a bit intrusive. Also, although the music wouldn't be too bad if the editing was good. So they play this scene where, the Enterprise is going and Sulu's seeing these swords on the screen. So if the Enterprise goes in either direction, they're going to hit the swords and they're all going to die. And every time they show that, they play this loud music. It goes, dun, 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 dun. And that's fine if they did it once or twice, but the problem is they keep cutting back to that like way too many times, and they play that music every time they cut back to it, and so it starts to get grating, hearing such loud, intrusive music over and over and over again, where we already get the point. Yes, he's seeing these swords, that's making him go to the planet. We don't need to cut back to it like 6 times within a 5-minute scene. And the scene in particular, when the kids first start controlling people's minds and Kirk has his little freak out, I'm losing command, and Spock is like being controlled. Like, the scene is badly edited. It goes on for too long, and they keep cutting back to the same shit, where we got the point of the scene, and the scene would have been more effective had it been more cut down and been more concise. Like, I actually like the part where Spock is, after he's being affected by the children, because when Kirk tells him to contact Starfleet, he's like, why should we bother with Starfleet? Why should we bother Starfleet with this? I don't agree with you. I think you're wrong. And then, like, Spock is, like, becoming aware of what's happening, so you see him do this to, like, clear his mind, and then he, like, clears himself of it. That was a nice touch. Now, a complaint that I will agree with, that I heard someone say, is that when they get in the turbolift and Kirk is having his little freak out, oh, I'm losing command, that Spock should have done a mind meld with him. And that's what I was expecting, actually. It would have made sense. But they said, no, Kirk just talked himself out of it and then realized that he was in command and he's fine. And then for the rest of the episode, he was fine. Which is dumb. I think that's one thing they should have taken from Spectre of the Gun is Spock sharing his mind control with Kirk, and he could have shared it with some other people. Like when Chekhov went to arrest them, like he should have just done forced the Vulcan mind meld and be like, there is no things, and then he would have been okay, and they could have gotten more people on the side, just like Spectre of the Gun. I think that would have been a better way to end the episode than what they're doing with Kirk, showing them pictures of the dead bodies of their parents, or showing them playing. Oh, look, you're playing with your dad. Look, you're playing with, isn't that fun? Now they're dead! That's kind of like a fucked up thing to do. Now, I know what they were getting at. They're getting at that the children were in denial and denying their trauma, but this is exactly what McCoy warned against. He warned against, that it would be too traumatic if you just all of a sudden snapped him out of it, which is exactly what he did. And then McCoy came to the bridge and saw the children crying. I was like, oh great, they're crying, that's such a good thing. Not realizing that Kirk probably caused permanent damage to these kids who will be traumatized for the rest of their life. Way to go. I think he could have found a better way to defeat, use Vulcan his mind meld thing. They could have defeated this stupid demon a better way. Maybe Spock should have mind melded with the kids. How about that? Anyway, but yeah, as I said, I didn't like the ending. I think the ending was dumb. And the concept's not particularly good either. But honestly, I was more interested. I was more engaged. I was more into this episode, more in suspense than I would be for Charlie X. I think Charlie X bothered me a fuck ton more than this episode did. But again, do not get me wrong. I am not saying this is a good episode. It most certainly is not. I mean, there's logical, and practical production issues with this episode, as I said, but I've definitely seen worse. I don't think this deserves to be the lowest rated episode on IMDb. Certainly not, and when Turnabout Intruder is much higher, which don't even get me started on that. But anyway, I would now like to thank my Patreon supporters for supporting me on Patreon. It is hugely appreciated. Absolutely keeps the channel going, and I am very much appreciated. We have Chuck Hooks, Kyrie091, Anthony D. Benedictus, Ricky Manigester, Joel Lavals, Brian A., Alessandro Miguelisio, Norman Buckwald, Stephen Kennedy, Brenton Berg, Allison Fordyce, and Brandon Neal House. Thank you all so very, very much for your support. So now I do have a couple of patron comments on this episode. Our first comment is from Ricky. This is another horrible episode of Season 3, but I wouldn't say that this is top tier awful like towards the end of the season has. When I first watched this episode, I would say the first 15 minutes of the episode were actually good because it presented an interesting mystery about the deaths of the children's parents, and their behavior appeared as they didn't care when it was brought up. The children would go out of their way to change the subject, so this was all pretty suspenseful and really well pulled off. That is until we get the moment when the children start to take over the ship and the crew hallucinated and acted stupid, and also the villain was so cheesy, and especially towards the end of the episode, the way he was defeated was so dumb and cheesy. So yes, a bad one, but the first 15 minutes saved this from being a straight out 1, so my rating is a 3 out of 10. Brandon Neal Howes has the next comment, and he says, "And the children shall lead. There's a Sith cave on Arrakis which causes the parents to commit suicide and Kirk to overact more than usual. I don't understand why the kids want to go to Marcos 12 in particular. Gorgon, the friendly angel, has no understandable plan or acting ability, and he appears to be wearing a shower curtain." Sulu is terrified of flying knives while Uhura sees herself in the terrible looking aging makeup and rightfully freaks out. Don't let Kirk in the turbo lift. He might overact too much and then need a hug from Spock. Why are the kids allowed to wander around the ship? Why does no one check before they beam the security guards into space? The kids are all doing the hand job gesture and chanting, and no one tries to stop them. When Kirk shows the kids video footage of the dead parents breaking Gorgon's power over them, and McCoy says, "Isn't it great to hear the children cry?" So ends Star Trek The Phantom Lawyer, or And the Children Should Leave. 0 coconut and vanilla ice creams out of 10. Alright, Brandon, you're copping out a bit. My scale's 1 through 10. There is no 0, but whatever. You're pointing out how much you hate this episode, so not as forgiving on it as I am. That is a good point of why they're just letting the children roam around. Like when the boy went up to the bridge and he was like, "Oh, can I stay here?" Kirk should have been like, no. Get the hell. It should have been like Picard on his ass and like, "Those children on my bridge, get the hell off my bridge." Like the fact they just let them wander around. And yeah, they could have actually, attacked them directly when they were mind controlling people like that. Those are good points, but some of these other points, as I already mentioned, I don't feel as strongly about. Oh, the beaming guards into space, I didn't mention that. My headcanon was the transporter chief, because there was a transporter chief, not Spock, who beamed him down, and that he was being affected by the children, and just like the other people were. I heard someone say, "Oh, there wasn't a child there," but maybe the child went down earlier and went, did his thing, and made that guy think that they were still orbiting the planet. I think that makes sense to me. So I'm okay with that because Spock didn't notice until after they already beamed the guards down. But yeah, so I actually thought that was pretty creepy too, how they beamed those people right into space because the kids were making it that Kirk still thought they were in orbit of the planet. So my rating for And the Children Shall Lead out of 10, I'm going to be, some people are going to call me super generous. I'm going to give this episode a 4 poor. I think I kind of have to because I think I gave Charlie X a 4, and I said this is better than Charlie X. I stand by that. So I was gonna give it a 3, but I was like, no, I should give it a 4 because Charlie X is worse. I think it really is. Did I give Charlie X a 4? That's too high. I should say 3. So I could give this episode a 3. Just change my rating for Charlie X to a 3. But you know what? Maybe I did give it a 3. I'm just remembering wrong. But you know what? Fuck it, I'll give it a 4 because I don't think this is the worst thing ever. I did think that this episode was actually pretty interesting and engaging until we got to the last 15 minutes, which ruined it. But, so it's not a good episode. And there were some editing errors, the acting wasn't the best. But I honestly think the acting's been worse in other episodes, honestly. I don't think this is the worst for acting. Turnabout Intruder, Dagger of the Mind. Yeah. Much worse. Anyway, so that is it for my review of And the Children Shall Lead. So coming up next on my channel, this Monday we have my Revisited over on Patreon for Spock's Brain, which is another example of an episode I don't think is as bad as many people claim it to be. So I will revisit my review to that on Patreon this Monday, and then Wednesday I'll be back live on public for everyone to see on my channel for Is There in Truth No Beauty, and then Thursday and Saturday I'm back over the Patreon again with a couple more revisited videos, first for The Empath on Thursday and The Tholian Web on Saturday. So that is what's coming up for Enchantment of Eternity, so be sure to check out my channel For that, be sure to check out my channel as I cover many more Star Trek videos and many videos on other shows as well. So be sure to subscribe so you can keep up with all of that. And thanks a lot for watching. Dot! 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 Dot!